Welcome to the Mental Health and You podcast. This podcast brings you information and advice from across the Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust, with a range of teams, services and those who use them sharing their experiences and wisdom with us every fortnight.
Welcome to the Psychology and Schools team podcast on exam support. I'm really pleased to be here today. I'm Dr. Beth Mosley, consultant clinical psychologist, with Linda Brendel, senior psychotherapist in the Psychology and Schools team. Morning, Linda.
Good morning.
And three amazing young people who are joining us today to share some of their experiences. We've got Courtney. Hi, Courtney.
Morning.
Grace.
Morning.
And James. So thank you so much for joining us today. And really, this podcast is aimed at parents and young people. So we're hoping to provide some insight that will be helpful for parents and when they're trying to support their young people, but also thinking about those young people themselves who might be just going into exam season and wondering how to get the best out of this period, really. So what is stress is a good question to start with. Why don't we define that? So we can say a dictionary definition is it's mental strain resulting from demanding circumstances. And that mental strain can have an impact on our body. It can make us feel physically anxious. So we might notice a racing heart, difficulties with concentrating. I know when I did my exams all those years ago, I can still remember those butterflies in my stomach and finding it difficult to get to sleep the night before an exam. We know it can also make us feel more emotionally charged. So we might find ourselves getting quite reactive and upset more easily. And our thoughts, we can find ourselves focusing and thinking a lot about the things that we're worried about. So am I going to pass that exam? Have I revised enough? All of those types of things. So what we know is it's a bit different from anxiety stress because it's very much about specific demands we might be experiencing. And once those demands are out the way, so a lot of young people I meet during exam season are finding life really tough. But as soon as those exams are over, they are happy and back to feeling their normal selves and back to a kind of full life where they're not preoccupied with that stress. So once the demand passes, typically that stress disappears. So anyway, I was going to hand over to Courtney, James and Grace and just see if they had any thoughts themselves about stress and exams and how it might have affected them.
Yeah, well, I find that for me and for people I know, I actually used to have to be quite, I'm out of education now, but I used to have to be quite careful with exams on a sort of biological level almost because I don't actually produce the hormones that help you to manage stress because of my health issues. So I actually have to, those for me are replaced by medication, which when I'm under any type of big stress, good or bad, including exams, emotional, physical, anything, they have to, that the amount of that medication that I take has to increase. And I tend to find that if anything, and again, this does apply to exams. Exams are a typical example of this. Any big stresses like that, I find I tend to get either very anxious, as you say, physically anxious, or unwell. I seem to sort of develop something like a cold, even if no one else around me has got one. And it's actually exactly like you said, Beth, pretty much as soon as that stress is gone, the quote unquote cold seems to start going away. And so what I did for because I got that during I think it was during my GCSEs. my first AS level exam. Had it as well. So when I did my actual A levels, I did actually request, and I don't know that I would recommend this, but I did revise, but I actually requested from the staff that helped me, the support staff in the school, sixth form, that I did not want to know when my first exam was.
Wow.
So
Quite bold.
they didn't tell me. I found out from a class, or sort of worked it out from among other things, a class group chat, and it did, at the time, it did work, because I managed to sit my A levels without getting ill.
Wow. So I think this is a really good example, Grace, isn't it, of how the knowledge of what's going on in our lives, that demand, has a automatic physical response. It affects
It
our
does.
immune system, and that, in a sense, what we're going to talk about a bit later on is how do we make sure we look after ourselves, our bodies and our minds during exam season, because actually we are going to be at more risk of getting ill and being depleted just because of the extra biological, I suppose, load that demand brings. I'm curious about Courtney and James. Obviously, Grace, your situation is quite unique, so that's and it's really helpful to highlight, those challenges really that we often don't have, complete control over, do we? So, Courtney and James.
So for me, it's again a little bit different. I'd say I could have used a bit of a kick up the bum. And I mean that in the best possible way. I think back and there's a lot of just procrastination and looking at, there's a lot to do, a lot to revise for. But did I leave it till last minute and stress even more? Yes, I did. And that's pretty much how it went. Every time I'd stress about the work, I'd stress about revision, and then I'd be behind on what I was meant to do. And then the worry I was in a vicious cycle that just didn't stop. Luckily, I managed to get good grades. I managed to pick it up. But now I know that where I am now, it was due to undiagnosed mental health conditions and everything like that. Yeah, I definitely could have done with a bit more prompting. I think my parents were a little bit, leave her to be independent, leave her to it, she'll be okay. And actually, I could have kind of done with maybe someone being a little bit up my bum and like, come on, we can do it. But yeah, mine was definitely more of a procrastination, and then worry even more when you get to that point. And I sort of made myself worse because I think I'd spend a lot of time. I'd get home, think I need to do this, I'm going to do this as I've got it, and then I could get on top of it, and then find myself watching a film, falling asleep, waking up, and then being behind on everything else. Mine was mainly procrastination and not a lot of support or pushing me to do the things that I was procrastinating about.
I imagine a lot of young people listening to this would completely be able to relate to that. Almost like the anxiety, the intention's there, and then the anxiety gets in the way almost of doing it. So I'm just curious as well, Courtney, because you're kind of asking for more prompting from your parents. Now, I'm a parent, and I have a 19-year-old who's at university now, but in his GCSE year, and this was COVID time, so it was when they were at home a lot, and I think doing a lot of gaming and watching Netflix. I remember we had a parents' evening on a WhatsApp call, and they basically said he's not making enough effort. And I remember I got off the call and I just really sort of said to him, well, this is it. If you don't want to get onto A levels and you don't want to do that, then carry on as you. I really kind of sort of said it as it was and said, it's down to you now. And I was a bit worried after I'd said that, but my son is very laid back. So, and he's quite a positive thinker. So that might be, some young people or parents who are listening on this call might have young people like in that position. And I was anxious, oh, if I'd taken it too far, but actually that moment of me just really saying enough is enough. How can I help you? So I didn't just say enough is enough. Come on now. I also then thought with him about what can I do or what can we do to make it easier for you to get that work done, to get that revision done. What are the things that stop you getting into the work or doing the work? And actually what he needed a bit of extra tuition for one of his subjects he was finding quite hard, which I was able to talk to school about. And we were able to think about how gaming and watching stuff is pretty addictive, isn't it? How could he avoid getting caught in that loop of gaming? So there was something about how do you as a parent get alongside your young person, give them either the kick or the gentle kind of arm around the shoulder, so that you can then think together about the things that might be the barriers to revision, and then what might be some of the solutions, and what can a parent do to support that, rather than, because often parents nag. So Linda, what are your thoughts?
I guess I was just thinking about almost the difference between Grace's and Courtney's experience and also listening to you, Beth, and just thinking that it might be helpful for people listening to the call to bear in mind a model that can be useful in thinking about how do we reach our sort of optimum for being ready to study, because Courtney's clearly talked about sort of almost feeling that sort of emotionally not stressed enough to do the study, and there's a model called the window of tolerance, which suggests that there is an optimum state that we can be in, where we can both access clear thinking and we can access our emotions. We can be mentally engaged, for example, with study, but very often we can be outside of this what's called window of tolerance. So Grace talked about the anxiety levels being high in the moment, the stress around exams taking to her in this model, they would call it a hyper emotionally aroused state. And so when you're in that hyper state, you can't think clearly, your mind's in a blur, almost the stress is so great because the chemicals shooting around the body go on too long that actually impacts on ability to think clearly and therefore to be able to focus and get on with things. And Grace talked about that side of things, but also you can be under aroused, and I think that's what Courtney's talked about, and they call that emotional arousal being under aroused. They call hypo arousal. So at that point you might just feel like you're not motivated, it's hard to engage yourself, really easy to be distracted onto other things. And I think, Courtney, you were talking about that procrastination a lot, so it's probably always something that is better to do, but then you end up noticing that you still haven't got on with all those things that you want to do. And I guess we might come back to this when we're talking throughout this podcast, thinking about how do we get people back into this window of tolerance where either they're too stressed or almost they're not focused enough to be able to actually manage well. I guess, Beth, you were talking about how you tried to do that with your son, to try and think about what ways would get him more engaged with doing that. And so I guess in this podcast we'll think about these ideas a little bit more, may come back to this window of tolerance. I think it's a really helpful concept to hold in mind.
And I think having more than one child, my son's always likely to fall into that hypo arousal. That's part of his character. And so in his life and with his personality, he often does need his friends or me or his dad to give him that stimulation, the right sort of stimulation to help move him up into the window of tolerance, if that makes sense. Whereas my daughter is at the other extreme, and I have to be very careful about the things I say to her, because quite often they can send her from the window of tolerance straight into hyperarousal. So that's really interesting and helpful, Linda. Thank you. And James, I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, so I thought I'd just talk about a bit about my experience. So I kind of had, I suppose it was, I don't know, it might have been different in some ways and similar in other ways to Grace and Courtney. I think for me there was a lot of procrastination, but also I think thinking about it now anyway, I think it's like I really didn't want to, when I was at home, I didn't want to think about school if I could help it. So sort of having to bring that home and do it at home, I really, I think that didn't help with the uh, procrastination. I think it was also certain subjects I had a particular worries about. I had particular anxiety with maths. I'd say mostly because of like early high school, like the way I was taught it, or the lack of teaching. Whereas like the sciences I was far more confident with, and therefore more relaxed about. So yeah, it was sort of, I'd say I had some of these, especially looking back on it now, I had like more of these, like these different things I think that were causing me to procrastinate. Where I was I suppose like I also I think I sort of had this complex of I need to do everything right all the time, and I hadn't really sort of learned that it's that that you can make mistakes, and you learn from making mistakes rather than sort of trying to do everything perfectly first time. So that also caused some anxiety and frustration. So that's sort of my angle on it, and I think sometimes it was a bit of nudging from the parents did help, but at the same time I think it could send me over the edge, because I was already very stressed about it. So but yeah, it's sort of a mixture of both similar and not so similar feelings and situations.
And it's really hard, isn't it? I'm sure the parents who are listening in will be thinking, how do we get it right? Because both I'm listening to you and Courtney and thinking you're both asking for that kind of prompting, but you're also probably both quite stressed and sensitive at the time. So that prompting could feel like another pressure and could get quite a negative reaction, because it sounds like you both had a sense of what you weren't doing or should have been doing, and then when someone like your parent reminds you, it can sometimes then make you feel really angry and annoyed with yourself, but it probably comes out with anger and annoyance at your parent, and then the parent's just like, wow, what can I do, I can't get it right. And they're then aware that you also might be stressed and worrying about your exams. They may be being really scared about whether they should be saying anything. So I don't know what your tips would be, to those parents who are struggling with how do they support you in a way that suits your needs in that moment, because it might vary from day to day.
I think a really interesting one, kind of following on from what you're saying there, Beth, is maybe to look sort of deeper into the communication. I feel like there are some young people out there who will appear incredibly laid back, and incredibly, they don't want to study, whatever. They're relaxed about their studies or their whatever. But then in the moment when they actually come to study and the person who is supporting them breaches the issue of study with them, that's when the anxiety rises and they suddenly turn into someone different. They become incredibly conscientious. I feel like there are young people out there who maybe do care, but maybe because of the other pressures around in the world, like social pressures or whatever, don't want to admit it. So they admit it by they almost shut off, deny the exam is happening, and then when they're actually faced with the exam, go,
panic. So it could
Yeah.
be a protective thing, is what you're saying.
I think so, yeah.
Don't interpret that laid backness as necessarily meaning the young person isn't stressed at all. It
For
might
some,
be their way
yeah.
of coping.
Yeah. I think there is actually stress bubbling under the surface.
So you mentioned communication, Grace. So I'm just trying to think about some of the things that as young people you found helpful about the way your parents might have communicated with you to help get a bit beneath the surface. So I'm thinking about what James said, as well. For some young people, they might feel quite happy about some of the subjects they're revising for because they're more confident. They feel like they understand the subject and they're going to do okay. But there might be key subjects that they struggle with more. They might have a learning need around that might be particularly challenging. And one of the things I think it's hard as a parent is to sometimes know the difference. So if you see a young person particularly stressed, you might assume they're stressed about all of their exams, but actually it could be one topic, which with knowing that as a parent or knowing that as a teacher means that you could think about what could we do to work together to support the young person around that particular topic, so that it feels less overwhelming, but actually recognize that the other areas are okay. So how can we as parents have a better chance of having those collaborative conversations with you, do you think?
For me, I think personally, and obviously I can't speak for Courtney and James and every other young person out there, but for me, one thing I do say to people, and that is one thing I've actually said in now that it's one thing I do say now, is persistence is absolutely crucial for me. If someone says to me, I don't know, are you okay or whatever, at first I might go, yeah, I'm good, how are you? And then when they actually break down to the surface and go, are you sure you're okay? That's the point at which I'm likely to fall apart and go, and I've got this pile of stuff to do and I haven't done it.
So I guess, Grace, something that you're talking about is that thing of just not looking just at a surface level, but really parents really noticing and paying attention to maybe what their young person is showing in their body language, how they're acting, their tone of voice, and persisting in sort of checking out if someone's okay, not just accepting the first response. That sounds a really helpful idea, Grace. I wonder if there's any other ideas from James and Courtney, of other top tips for parents.
So for me, I would say, I'd say look at the bigger picture. I think from my childhood, it wasn't full of communication and building bonds, and I think that's where it fell apart. So I think if you're looking at the bigger picture, it's talking to your child, your son, your daughter, about other things as well. having that relationship to start with, so that it's not just the only thing they're nagging you about is making sure your grades are up and making sure you've done this and you've done that, but it's actually making that relationship open about everything. What did you talk about with your friends today? Did you have fun today? Did you tell me that you couldn't talk to me about anything? Come to me, I will listen, I am open, I don't judge. You can tell me anything. And then when it comes to stresses and it comes to exams and it comes to teenage tantrums, that you're not going to get the you're going to get the no, sit, just talk to me, rant to me, open up to me. And then from that, you're not going to go, oh good, they only come to me when they want me to do something, they only come to me when I'm seeming just moody, but actually underneath, if you dig a little bit, there's a lot going on. And it might be difficult childhood, it might be trauma, it might be abuse, it might be bullying. It's not just the exam. And then equally, if you flip it round, it's really hard to be a parent, especially to moody teenagers. And as much as that came with, and don't get me wrong, it might be different for other people, but I had mental health conditions and I had underlying mental health conditions that weren't diagnosed. So, it might have been that my parents thought, my God, it's like hurricane when she comes home. I don't want to speak to her because she's always, irritated. She's always miserable. She stays in her room. She doesn't talk to us. But equally, if you flip it on that and you're open and you feel like you've got a place to go with those stresses, that is also, I think, a huge foundation that I lacked. And that's why when I went to my room and no one checked on me, I was on my phone. And that's why when I went to school and I hadn't done it, is because no one had checked up on me. No one had asked me what went wrong with my day, why I was doing what I was doing, why I was sad. And I think that sort of open relationship, if that trickles into every aspect of life, can make that difference, to someone being able to go to them and say, look, what's been going on? And can I help you with anything? And then, like I say, if it's not just when you're stroppy and you're lacking in revision or you're lacking in grades, that's where it can be sort of overwhelming. And that's the only reason that they're speaking to me is when I'm doing something wrong. But I think the bigger picture is the relationship that you make with that person over everything. Even if it is, what did you have for lunch today? They know they've got someone to speak to in a safe space. I think that would have made a huge difference to me.
I completely relate to that. Actually, that's one thing we talk about, and I've sort of heard about quite openly, is that when someone is stressed or upset or whatever, or just needs someone there, step into their world. And it could literally be as simple as giving them a hug or watching their favourite show with them, or even just holding their hand or taking a walk. That sort of thing has the potential to make more difference even than words. Because you've stepped into their world, you've acknowledged that they're not just a pain in the backside, moody, hormonal young person, teenager, whatever. They are a person who has feelings and an identity. And once you acknowledge that, I think that is what would make them more likely to open up.
Yeah, I guess Grace and Courtney, you're raising some really important things here. It's about the importance of relationship, and parents creating opportunities to build relationship in all sorts of different ways over time and consistently, so that the focus is on the relationship. And I guess it can be really easy for parents to get very caught up with the stress around exams and want to do the best for their child, and therefore get a bit tunnel vision. And I guess that's perhaps what Courtney was talking about in terms of, you know, just that over focus just on exams and nothing else. But I guess what I was really hearing is from both of you the importance of that communication that can be done in different ways. And Courtney, you raised how young people can inadvertently give those messages of almost pushing away. And I guess we have to be mindful that sometimes when people are stressed, they want to withdraw, but actually what they need is the support from others around and parents around. And I think you really helpfully gave an example of when that can really be needed. So I think those are some really key messages. Thank you, both of you, when thinking about what parents can do that can be helpful.
Courtney, what were you thinking?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say on the flip of that, and it sounds like, you know, parents need to do more. They need to talk to their young people. They need to do this. They need to do that. I'd also just like to flip it round on a perspective where I'm now an adult and I now have a mortgage, and oh my God, it's not what I thought it was going to be. And it's very easy, I think, as a younger person to sit and think, well, they're all right. They don't have exams to do. They don't have to revise. They don't have to do that. They don't have to do that. But equally, no, they just have to work full time. Or if they don't, they have to look after someone, or they have to look after their children, or, you know, they're got all these bills that come in. They have to make sure that they're paying for, and they have to pay for all of the Netflix that you're wanting to watch. And then they have to do a food shop, whether they like it or not. And then, you know, they've got to go to here and there and do a million different things. And I didn't appreciate that when I was at school, because I thought, oh, well, yeah, it must be nice for you. And as an adult, it's not nice. It's really not. And you probably have even less support as an adult than what you would have done when you were at school, when you had, you know, pastoral care that you could rely on, or friends. I think as an adult, it can be very isolating, and even more so when your child is struggling and you don't know how to help them. You know, and I feel like as a parent, there's almost that expectation that you know how to handle it, or you should know how to handle it, and you should be able to support them, when actually, you know, if you're going through grief in the family, like I did, I went into high school having lost my best friend being my granddad. And that's very isolating. But equally, I didn't really think that actually my mum lost her dad. So she equally had a lot going on, if not more. But that doesn't feel that way when you're in that situation. And that's where I think the communication comes in, where you sit together and you have that open relationship and you're able to talk about how you feel and what's going on. And that's where then, yeah, you can then bring up the bits and pieces that no one really wants to talk about, but they will be easier to talk about if you have that relationship.
That's so helpful for to hear, Courtney. As a mother myself, who often thinks her children don't appreciate just the levels of stress of juggling life as a parent, that when you get to adulthood, you can reflect on it and view it in hindsight, which is really lovely to hear. But you're absolutely right. I think the stresses and pressures that we're often managing as parents, along with the additional pressure of trying to be the best parent we can, and trying to struggle to get it right, and worry about our children and worry about their futures, all of those things combined can make this task of communicating well really difficult. And I guess it just reminds me of how important, not just for the young people doing their exams, but for parents too, to think about how do you build up your own resources to manage that stress. Like, we know young people shouldn't just be revising all of the time, every minute of the day, thinking about their exams. They need to think about their having opportunities for physical activity to kind of get rid of some of the stress chemicals and be outside and have some connection time with their friends, have some really good downtime. And I guess it's the same for parents. And sometimes it can feel really hard as a parent to have any time which is not spent on looking after others. And it's such a priority, because if you're going to support your children and your family and be your child's cheerleader, then you need to have enough of resources yourself, and you need to have done the things that are going to help you rebuild your kind of resources. And I guess I'm thinking about cheerleaders. I talk about cheerleaders a lot. Like, those people you can really trust are going to support you no matter what. And often as parents, you can become quite isolated and busy, and you forget who your cheerleaders are, or you don't have that conversation with your sibling who can be your cheerleader. Some people's siblings aren't there, or a friend, because everybody's busy. And I guess it's about who, as a parent right now, if you're on this call listening, what support network, what social network can I turn to? People I know will help give me some space, or help me even just have a nice evening where I'm not worrying and thinking about all of the pressures on me, so that you're in a position to then go to your young person feeling like you've got a bit more capacity to hold some of their stress, and listen curiously, rather than feel in your head, yeah, but you have no idea what I'm having to deal with right now, which is something that you can end up feeling as a parent when you're holding a lot. So there's something there about how do young people look after themselves during exam period, but how do parents as well?
I think going back to the thing about how young people look after themselves. So again, when I did my A-levels, I literally used to do a thing where, and it was the simplest thing, but I'd do a bit of revision, and then you were talking about physical exercise, going out, getting outside, that kind of thing. I literally used to do a thing where I would do a bit of revision and then literally just walk up and down my stairway. And just that level of exercise really helped. And then when I do what I do now, obviously, as I say, I'm not doing exams at the moment, but now a lot of what I do is very much like revising. It involves sitting down, writing, concentrating, looking at things. And I think I went through a stage when I first started where I am now, that I felt like I needed to do everything. I needed to just sit and blitz, get everything done. And then when it came to the evening time, or time where I could come away and socialise, by that time, I haven't got the energy, because I've just been doing stuff constantly and haven't processed any of it, or processed. So what I've started doing again now is, and I find it particularly helps in the morning, is to do what I've got to do. Obviously, like the online, like you check your emails, you get yourself ready for the day, that sort of stuff, and then do some exercise. And I found that, so like when I'm done here, I'll go and do some exercise. And I know when I then come back to everything else that I've got to do online, I am, or throughout the day, I feel that just after that little bout of somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour and a bit's exercise, I will feel hopefully recharged, less anxious, I can process things more. And yet it just makes such a difference.
And I guess that's what we know with exercise, Grace. Thanks so much for bringing that up further, because what we know with exercise is actually has this amazing impact on our body. I talked about that window of tolerance and the optimal level earlier, and both whether actually we end up finding that we're we're very stressed and hyper aroused or almost under stressed, that doing exercise can bring us at either end back into that middling optimal ground
And
where we can most easily access our thinking and be engaged.
And I also find that when I'm in that moment exercising, I am completely clear. I shut everything off. I don't look at my phone. I don't look at my emails, anything. I just put music on and just exercise. And the only thing I look at, just in case I need to, is the time. But apart from that, it's a complete, even if I know I've got stuff to tend to, I try to make it so that, right, that can wait until I've done it, so that when I do come back to do it, I come back refreshed.
Wow, that's great. I'm just aware of time, and we have got so much to keep talking about. So I'm loath to draw the podcast to a close, but unfortunately, we're going to have to. I just
Well, I've
wanted
actually
to,
got to go and do my exercise.
yeah, well, brilliant. I was just going to say, in terms of maybe one short top tip that you could give just before you go. But I was also going to say to the listeners that we do have on YouTube under the NSFT channel a 60-minute workshop which you can watch on exam stress. So there's lots of really practical tips there, and it's something that a young person could watch or a parent. So Grace, before you pop off, short and sweet top tip. It sounds like exercise might be it for you.
For young people, exercise, move around, creativity, keep your identity and the things you love. And for parents, I would say, and supporters, I would say, read behind the, look beyond the surface and persist
Don't give
with
up.
your
Wonderful.
communication.
Thank you, Grace. And Courtney?
So for the children or the student, I would say what I would have done looking back is to come home whilst you're still in that school mode. Come home, dedicate yourself to whatever you've written in your journal or planner for that day, that, you know, so that if you do it on Monday, you do Monday's task. By Tuesday, you're not got Monday and Tuesday, you've just got Tuesday. And then throughout the week, if you do it in a block after school, when you're in your zone, you're still in education mode, then after that block, you know you've got free time to look after yourself. Stay on top of it and prioritise. For parents, I would say parents, carers, whoever that is having to deal with a stressed person, self-care for yourself. Look after yourself, have that bath, have that time to unwind, because parenting and adulting is hard and you deserve that time too.
Lovely to hear. And I think what James said earlier about finding it hard to do school stuff at home, remember schools often run exam homework clubs. So if you could, in that situation, Courtney, get your Monday stuff done on Monday if you just stayed on at school for an extra hour. And for some young people who don't like to go take that stuff home, like James, maybe just staying on for the extra hour to go to that homework or exam club would then free up the rest of the evening. So that's really wonderful advice, Courtney. And lastly, James.
I think Grace and Courtney have done a good job of covering most of it. I'd say I know it's it can be really hard for one reason or another, and as a result you procrastinate. But I would, so from my experience, I'd say try and ask for as much help as possible if you are struggling, which I know is also not an easy thing for some people to do, but you'd be surprised how much better it makes you feel just for communicating your situation to anyone, really, not just your parents. So I'd say, and for the parents, I think what Grace and Courtney have said is really good. I suppose, just try, if you can, try and have a conversation about what your child finds helpful, and that can open up a lot of options, and some that you might not necessarily have thought of.
Great. And so actually just saying what can I do to help is actually a really good starting point. And lastly, Courtney, you got your hand up.
Yeah, no, I just really quickly, I just had a thought as well. When I think of, some of us are, we do have other things going on. We do have conditions. We do have disabilities. We do, have blocks. Some of us are just lazy. Some of us do need a kick. And equally, I think it's worth reminding them that this is probably, something that if they continue and they get into that headspace that this is what you're going to have to do, eventually they'll go into either higher education or a job, and you're not going to be able to sit and check your phone and not do your jobs then. So, it's kind of like reality check, for just being idle and doing nothing. You're going to have a bit of a shock if you think that that's how life's going to be from now on.
So keeping it real, because you're right, just like Grace, you were saying, you're not dealing with exam stress at the moment, but you're actually dealing with the pressures of a job, which are so the way that you manage your exams, the exam period can be great preparation for the things that will help you as you go into higher education or work.
It is,
Yeah,
because
definitely.
the way I work is actually very similar to the way, and the amount of dedication and whatever that I give to my job is very similar to what I did with my A levels, because I'm fully invested.
And so the habits that you learn in that time and the support that you get to learn those habits and get that balance can really make a difference. And I just want to add that my son is now at university, and he's the most self-motivated, committed, hardworking learner. I can never take the mickey out of him again about being lazy, because there's something about that process of GCSEs and A levels which enabled him to learn about the value of doing the things that he did to get him where he wanted to get. So I think that's a really important place to end, really. What you do during that period can help you as you go into adulthood.
It's finding, just one final thing, I'm sorry. It's
okay.
finding the thing you love as well,
Yes,
because
that's
GCSEs
so true.
GCSEs you have to do, obviously, within ability. A levels are an option, but you have to stay sort of in some kind of occupation post 16. University, obviously you do, and then you've got university and work, and maybe apprenticeships. You have to go through those steps of trying things and sitting things out to find the thing. I've been through GCSEs, A levels, 2 years of university, and I finally found the thing that
What a wonderful feeling.
like your son.
Yeah, that's it. It's because it's the topic he loves. It's what he loves and he's good at. And now so Grace, that's such a brilliant last point, that for a lot of young people, you're having to do lots of topics you're not that interested in. If you can, once you find the thing you love, quite often some of these challenges are less challenges, because the motivation
and that is I now get to, because I've been through that system and different phases of that system, I now get to do what I love every day.
Oh.
And I love it.
So it's worth it. But again, even if things don't go to plan in your GCSEs, your A levels, it's not the end of the world. There are lots of other options. So it's also important to hold on to that. And I think that's a really important point, because it can often feel like there's so much riding on how well you're going to do. But actually, I think you'll probably find when you get on the other side that there are other opportunities if things don't go to plan. Anyway, we have to finish. We could keep talking all day, I think. I cannot thank you, Grace, James and Courtney, enough. I think the parents who are listening in will be so grateful for your kind of thoughts. I am, as a parent of a young person in year 10, I've really listened and heard what you've said, and it's going to help me actually in the coming weeks and months. So thank you so much, and take care and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for the
Thank
opportunity,
you very
Beth.
much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to make sure you don't miss a future episode. Let us know what you thought of this episode by reaching out on social media. If you haven't already, listen back to previous episodes to hear some of the best mental health advice for you.